I think with a lot of people, there is a certain amount of fear about launch. It's not so much procrastination in that they don't know what they need to do and they don't know how to do it. It's the fear of, I'm going to launch this thing and it's going to be a complete flop. And I think the biggest kind of mindset shift that I had when I finally started to kind of ship a lot of stuff was I didn't really see it as a success or failure in terms of the actual like result of it. I mean, I started to think about the fact that I shipped something was the success, right? Like whether it got 1 user or 100 users or 1,000 users, that wasn't my barometer for success anymore. And I think once you stop thinking about this is that it was good that I did this because I got 1,000 people to come to the website or 100,000 people come to the website. When you start thinking about, oh, I learned this along the way and I was able to launch this and I was able to put this out there for people to see, you kind of remove a lot of those obstacles.
Hey Mubs, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited.
Look, man, so we've been chatting over Twitter. I've been seeing you build over the last few years, actually. I've been following your stuff. It's really impressive. You're definitely one of the makers out there, if we want to use that word, creators, if we want to stay on brand, who are like just building at such a crazy velocity. You've had like 90 plus projects that you've worked on over the last few years, and we're going to dig into some of that today. But yeah, I'd love to get a background of kind of who you are and what you're working on nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people I have a long and windy road in terms of how I got to where I am, but born in a small village in the north of Pakistan. My dad went to study in England, and so when he finished studying, he decided he was going to move the family out to England. So we all just kind of moved over to England when I was about 4. Spent my youth and kind of most of my education time over in England. Went to university, started tinkering with computers when I was about 8 years old, just playing around with whatever was in the house. We started with a VIC 20, I believe. It was a Commodore VIC 20 back then. And yeah, so just really enjoyed working with computers. Ended up going to university to kind of study computer science as well. I got a job, my second job after university. My first one didn't last very long, but was with an Australian company, but they were moving from Australia. They were running an event in England, and they decided they wanted to move all their stuff out to California during the first kind of internet kind of explosion that happened.
It's like end of the 90s, right? Like 99 sort of.
I moved to San Francisco in 1997.
Oh wow, so you were there for all of the craziness.
Absolutely, yeah. I was right around the South Park area there, where Wired was headquartered and all that kind of stuff too. So really had a really good time in San Francisco. Eventually I got offered a job. A friend of mine who worked for the company I was in San Francisco moved to New York. He was working at a startup out in New York. Asked me if I wanted to move out to New York, so I kind of moved out here to the East Coast and kind of been here ever since. I used to live in the city, now live in kind of upstate New York. And yeah, so I mean, I really enjoyed working for kind of startups. For the last probably 10 years, though, I kind of worked in agency world, just kind of doing things for some pretty large agencies and customers of those agencies as well. And then always just really enjoyed making stuff on the side. So just, making fun evening, weekends and evenings stuff. Well, with a lot of those, it starts in the weekends and evenings and then kind of expands out there as well.
Yeah, it takes over your life. Yeah, know the feeling.
It does.
So cool, man. And thanks for that background. And I guess one of the things that really drew me to you was you were named Pod Hunt's Maker of the Year, I think 2016, and you've been runner-up a bunch of times as well. But, more than just winning the prize, essentially, it's really just the fact that you were consistent enough to get recognition on, essentially in the tech industry, Product Hunt is one of the main platforms where people launch products. I guess I saw your name probably there for the first time. And then over the years, I've seen you just recently launched something with Nathan Latka, who was also on the show like a year ago or something like that, called Founderpath, which we'll dig into. I'm just curious, you mentioned California there, like in 97. Take me back to that world. What was it like at that time?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of unique for me because it was my first time really not living at home as well. So I moved. We like I said, I moved from Pakistan to England. Lived at home my whole life, and so my first even during university, I still lived at home. And so when I got the offer to move to California, I think everybody in my family was a bit shocked that, one, I said I wanted to do it, and then two, that I wasn't kind of on the plane home like a few months afterwards. but it was really, I mean, it was an amazing time. It was a fantastic experience to kind of be out in the middle of, all of those awesome companies that were starting up back then and are still around as well now. And just to kind of see how they helped form what the internet has become now. And it's funny that, a lot of the stuff that I still do is stuff that I learned back then in terms of, how to build a good, rich experience on the web. And obviously the sort of technologies change in terms of how we kind of do all of that stuff. But the things that we were trying to do back then are still the things that we're trying to do now. But we just have access to a lot more tools and a lot more technology to kind of make all of that happen now.
And I should also just point out, since people listen to the show and know who I am, like I have a pretty similar background to you without all the technical expertise. But in terms of my family's Pakistani as well, we landed in the UK. I was actually born in the UK, but grew up there. And now I also live in New York too. So we've kind of, you're a few years ahead of me, but we've got some similar path there as well. I guess we can just kick it off really around picking projects, because I know you've got 90 plus projects you've had over the years. And maybe we could just share a few examples. I think from my research, the ones that stood out to me that I'd heard of or I'd used even was Pod Hunt, which I think, because I'm a podcast fan, people could go and find new podcast episodes and stuff like that, kind of like Product Hunt for podcasts. You've now worked on Founderpath with Nathan Latka, which is helping provide debt equity to debt financing to SaaS founders, right, without giving up any equity. Are there a few others that really stand out to you over the years?
Probably the ones that you've heard of, or you may have heard of. There was a website I built about 3 years back called Will Robots Take My Job.com.
Yeah.
It was just around the whole sort of automation phase that, still people are concerned about AI and robotics and stuff. That was a fun project that I did that in the first month had done 4 million page views.
Oh, wow.
It just really exploded. One of the other things that you might have heard of is a company called QUUU.co, which is a social media kind of helps people run their social media output. That I started probably about 6 years back now with some friends over in England. So that's just kind of a handful. In terms of ideas, I tend to use my side projects as a way to explore things that are really interesting to me and things that I think will be significant in the future. So with something like Pod Hunt, obviously I think there's a big growth opportunity still existing for podcasting. I started Pod Hunt about a year ago now, and even back then and even now, I think there's still a huge potential in terms of the podcasting industry. So I always like to say the best way to really understand kind of anything is just to be in that space. So if you want to know what it's like to be a podcaster or be in the podcasting industry, either have a podcast or have a tool or something like that. That kind of is in that space. And the same with the sort of the whole idea of kind of AI and kind of automation and stuff. What's the best way to understand what the future implications of robots taking over all of our jobs is, to build a website that kind of explores that. And again, even with Q, I've been a big fan of Twitter for a really long time. I've been very active on that platform. And again, I was very interested in social media. So in that case, when Dan and Matt came to me with the idea of Q, I was very interested in that social media space anyway. So it made like perfect sense to kind of explore creating an idea kind of in that space as well, just so you can get a real deep, rich understanding of kind of what's happening there as well.
I didn't actually know. I hadn't seen the robotics AI robots one. I love that one. So actually, let's go into that one. Like it seems like something that came on your radar. People are talking about this. You're probably interested in it. Like, how did you now take that in your head and say, okay, I'm going to figure out something that would be useful for someone to look at?
Yeah, so this is another one that actually somebody else came to me with the idea, which is kind of cool. But they come, people come to me with like high level ideas, or they come with me with like, this is an important, this is interesting. So what happened with that one? I met somebody online. So his name's Dimitar. He lives in Bulgaria. We've never met in person. We've kind of talked online on Skype and kind of all these kind of online chat tools and things. And so we were just talking. He's like, I'd love to work with you on some kind of idea. And we're like, well, let's find something really small that we can work on, that we can see if we like working together, if we want to build something larger together in the future. And so he basically told me, hey, look, there's this report that I found. It was published by the University of Oxford in 2013, I think it was. And it looked at just these statistics of what's the likelihood. I think they did a study of about 750 jobs, and they looked at the different skill sets that you needed to do that job, and what was the percentage likelihood that a robot or some kind of AI could do that job instead of it having to be done by a human being instead.
Oh, got you. Okay.
And so we kind of went through that report, and we kind of like, well, could we turn this into? I mean, it was like a 300-page long report, right? Nobody's going to read that, right? Like nobody who's got any time is going to go read that. And so they had a big table at the end of like all the jobs and what the percentage was. We're like, could we take this report and turn it into something that people can just easily search for their job? They can, or we can augment the sort of jobs with some interesting stats from other places as well. So we took that report, and in about 2 weekends we kind of extracted the information out of the report, added some extra information from other places as well, and we created basically, which was like a 1 or 2 page site really, which was like, you came to the home page, you put in your job, or you could click just show me a random job, and it would just kind of give you a kind of a fun page with what the percentage likelihood of your job being automated away was, and how many of those kind of jobs there were in the country, and how much people making those kind of jobs would normally earn, and just some other stats like that. So we kind of like, let's just see if we like working together. He did an awesome job on the UI of that site. And I did, all of the making it all work side of things. And we launched it. And like I said, in the first month, it had, I think it was 1 million page views in the first week, 4 million page views in the first month that it was out there.
I think there's quite a lot to unpack there in terms of things we can all take away from that. And I've been in a similar position to you, and it's something we'll dig into a little bit later in more detail too. But let's say I've got an idea, I'm not a technical person, or I'm a designer and you're an engineer or someone who can do all making things work part. Like I've been in that situation where I'll go and essentially pitch myself or pitch my idea to someone like yourself and say, hey, I've got this idea, this is what I can add value to this project, and this is how you can add value, and I'd love to work together. And that was something I did a few times where the other person said, okay, cool, well, why don't we just do this small thing, see if we like working with each other, and you'll be surprised, it's just so much better than jumping straight into the deep end, right? And like, it's the same way when you do job interviews, like how much do you really get to know someone in 5-6 hours of interviews. Like, it's very difficult. So you build this project, it gets 4 million page views. Then what happens from there? Do you guys start thinking about how can we make money from this? Can we keep it going? Do we need to spend a bunch of time maintaining it? I'm curious where your head was at with that project.
I mean, unfortunately, the project was very specific, right? Like, I mean, even the sort of name of the website and the domain that we bought, it was literally willrobotstakemyjob.com. So there's very little that you can do to kind of pivot that idea, you know, take all this traffic and apply it to something else, because it's very, very, very specific. But yeah, we threw some ads up on it. I mean, actually, after the first night, once we saw, because I think in the first day it had like 50,000 page views in the first 24 hours that it was that it was live. And so we were like, all right, let's just throw some ads up here, even if we just make like a few bucks, at least it'll cover the hosting cost and, you know, sort of anything like that. But then but the traffic kept going up and up and up, and I think we made like $3,000 in the first. So in that 4 million page views, I think we made like $3,000 in that first month that it was actually live, just because of how many page views it turned, essentially. And so yeah, so it was a kind of a one and done kind of thing, because like I said, there wasn't really anything that you could do to kind of, you know, sort of pivot it and sort of try and use that traffic for other things. But yeah, so I think we sold it. I think it was about 18 months after we launched it. We were just like, we don't know what to do with this thing, and we don't really want to maintain it and stuff like that. So we just ended up selling it based on some multiple of how much it was still making off of ads, kind of at the time as well.
Got it.
So
okay, cool. So in that case, you actually sold it. Okay. Yeah,
because like I said, we just didn't know what to do with it. We obviously, I mean, he and I are not kind of experts in employment or HR or anything like that. We're not really experts in AI and robotics either. So we were like, let's just see if we can just offload this now.
So if this was a question actually from @Kieran Doyle on Twitter when we were asking people what we should talk about. So he said, what are the factors, what's the most important factor to determine taking on a new project? I think you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but if we were trying to pick one or two things that you're looking for when picking a project versus passing it off, is that something you've consciously written down somewhere, or like, how do you think about it?
Yeah, not really, because I think it changes all the time, right? Based on what's happening in your life, based on what's happening in the world, based on, you know, who's coming to you. I mean, there's a whole different ways to kind of measure that, and it also depends on, just kind of like you said, is it a serious long-term project that you're kind of working on, or just kind of a fun kind of weekend thing where it's like, I just want to see what it's like working with this person, or I want to just try this new technology or this new tool to just to kind of get an experience of kind of what it's like to kind of work with instead as well. So I think the first thing you have to evaluate is like, why are you trying to make this thing and who you're trying to make it with, just to kind of help you kind of figure out kind of what the long-term implications of kind of taking on that project would be, you know. And then ultimately for stuff like this, it's measuring, and it's hard, but measuring enthusiasm, not just for you, but if you're working with somebody else as well, like how really excited is somebody about the idea, how, you know, are they just trying to chase a trend, or are they just trying to chase a market rather than they're really excited about that particular market? Like, it's like, for example, with something like Pod Hunt, like how excited are you about the podcasting industry for the future of it? Or are you just saying, oh, look, people are making lots of money doing podcasting, I should do something in that space as well, without really having a good appreciation and a good understanding of kind of what that industry is, and being excited about the potential for that industry for the next 5 or 10 years as well.
And it kind of brings up this this concept of founder product fit that I've heard you talk about and others have as well. So people are probably used to hearing product market fit, where you've got a product and you're trying to understand if the market needs this product, and there's a whole process for going through that. But I kind of like this, which is about founder product fit. So could you explain like what that means to you?
Yeah, I mean, essentially it comes down to, are you the right person to build this thing? Are you the right person to solve this particular problem, right? Like you might be able to see that there's a need for a product in a specific market, or if you're just like, well, if we could just pivot this idea that we found in this other industry, we could just pitch it kind of in this industry instead. But again, like if you don't have a sort of interest in that particular industry, if you like, let's say you wanted to build websites for accountants, you might be a best person to build a website, kind of out there. You might have all the skills that you need, but you need to talk to accountants every day. You need to understand their language. You need to understand what to put on their website so that you can market the accountants really well. And not just accountants, it could be lawyers, it could be real estate agents. You have to understand the industry. You have to understand the people who are involved in that as well. So as a person who's a maker, you have to think about, yes, there's a need here. Yes, there's a demand here, but am I the right person to kind of try and fill that need? And not just can you fill it, but are you going to be excited about waking up every day for the next 5 or 10 years trying to do that thing as well? Because I think ultimately a lot of people burn out, not necessarily because they're working too hard, but just because the things that they're doing just do not excite them at all. And so it's very hard to kind of like work 8-10 hours a day, or even longer if you're in startup world, really, when you're not excited about stuff. When it's a big slog to wake up in the morning and say, no, I'm going to go talk to 20 accountants. It's like nothing against accountants. I've worked with plenty of really awesome accountants over the years, but that doesn't mean I want to build websites for them and talk to them every day either.
No, I get you, man. And that's and I guess I'll just add some commentary from my side, because the whole point of this podcast is to talk to different people with different opinions, and there's never a right or wrong answer most of the time. There's like a lot of gray, and that's and I think what you're saying there is on one side of the scale, and I generally agree with it, but I think it really is important that person has self-awareness to understand that that's really high, that ranks really high in the factors that will keep them going, because ultimately the goal is you need to do something that you'll be motivated to keep doing for a long period of time. And for some people, like there are people I've met who really are so motivated by money that they would just be happy making money every day, and that gives them a buzz, and they're like, okay, well, I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to place the pieces to the puzzle here, and it works out for them. But I've seen a lot more examples of people who become a lot more passionate about a space and are genuinely interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a little bit also on, like, if you look at most successful people, they don't work on something for a year or two, right?
Yeah.
Like they work on something for 5, 10, 15, 20 years sometimes. And so if it's not something you're excited about, you can do it for a year or two. You can muster up kind of enough energy and enough excitement for like a year or two, just because you see the sort of excitement in the industry about a particular trend or whatever. But to get past that hump and to do the 3 and the 4 and the 5 and the 10 and the 15 years, if you're not really excited about kind of what you're doing and kind of who you're doing it with and for, it makes that really hard. And, like I said, like some people will work in something for 1 or 2 years. They'll just exit and they'll just try and flip it and make some money and move on to the next thing, which is also a fine strategy. But I think you just have to understand that that's your strategy. And if that's your strategy, then kind of what you build and how you build it also changes as well. Because, what you do to build something that's going to have a, 10, 15, 20 year lifespan versus something that you want to flip in a year or two. What you build and how you build it kind of changes on its head as well.
In a similar vein, again, from Kieran Doyle on Twitter, we're talking about, one was about starting a new project. The other one is about knowing when to call it quits. So he asked, what are the signs it's time to wind down and move on to the next? And this, I think, is actually something that doesn't really get talked about in a lot of nuance. People just say, oh, it didn't work out and I moved on. Or like, oh, something else came around. But it's really like going into that moment and deciding, okay, this is a project where I don't see any room for it anymore. There's not the potential that I thought it had. Because the flip side is exactly what we were just talking about, where people give up too early and they say, okay, well, it's not working, so I'm going to quit. So it's a really fine line between persistence and knowing when it's not the right thing to work on.
Yeah, I mean, I think with a lot of this stuff, I think it depends a little bit on, well, it depends a lot on terms of what you're doing, but I things just take longer than people think as well, right? Like you put out an MVP of your product or whatever, people expect, oh, I'm going to launch this thing, and then in the next few days, in the next few hours, I'm going to get people signing up left and right. And the reality of that situation is, no, it's a hard slog to launch something, but it's an even longer, harder slog to get people to pay you money to use it as well. And so I think, obviously having that perspective in mind that, things are going to take a while. I think what I try and do kind of in this situation is, rather than try and shut things down and just kind of leave them, I try and reduce the amount of work that I need to do on an active daily basis to kind of keep the things up and operational. Because things do take time. It takes time for your site to start rank for SEO, and to people searching for it will actually find it. Even when you launch on things like Product Hunt and stuff like that, people don't always buy straight away, right? Like I need that thing, but I don't need it now. I need it in a few months, or I need it in a few weeks, or whatever it is. And so, what can you do to minimize your sort of work on that, so that you can do other things, kind of while you're waiting for things to get traction as well. So I think that's the bit that I try and focus on is, yes, I know it hasn't got that hockey stick that kind of everybody expects, but that hockey stick takes a long time to kind of arrive as well. And so at some point you have to sit down and say, look, this has been live for 6 months, or it's been live for a year. It doesn't have the kind of traction that I was expecting and hoping for. And then you just kind of have to do the sort of ROI work there, in terms of, okay, if I carry on working on this system, if I carry on maintaining it and adding new features, how much time is it going to take up? And what's the likelihood that after 6 months or a year or whatever, that people will just magically start to sign up for it as well? And so you just, it kind of depends on everybody's personal situation in terms of where they are, what kind of else they're working on, if they have a full-time job. If you have a full-time job, then having something that takes 6 months to a year to kind of really take off is not a big deal, because you're still earning money, you're still, paying the bills to cover your rent and food and everything like that, right? Like, but if this was supposed to be your thing that was going to make you money so that you could earn a living, then maybe it's time to kind of leave that and try something else as well.
I think one of the words I've heard you use for projects and sticking to stuff is energy. And energy, like, do I still have the energy for this? Do I at the end of the day, am I feeling energized? Have you noticed that with yourself, something in a similar vein, where like the energy for a project evolves over time, where you really did have this kind of positive energy, and towards the end it just starts fading out?
Yeah, I mean, I think as human beings, we kind of go through those cycles anyway, right? Like you kind of have an idea, you're really excited about it, you kind of work on it, you kind of get to the point where you can launch it, hopefully, and then just naturally, it's normal. Like after you focus on something for so long, your kind of energy towards it does tend to wane a little bit. And I think that's a really good test, right? Like, if you work on something for a while, you've got high energy for it, you work on it. If you step away from it, because you're doing other things, or because life comes in, are you still thinking about it? Are you still thinking about that idea? Maybe I tried to build something, it wasn't quite exactly what I wanted to build, but maybe if I tweak it, it'll become the sort of thing that I was hoping for. If you still have that, if you're still thinking about not necessarily that specific idea, but if you're thinking about that kind of let's say, with something like Pod Hunt, if you're still thinking about the podcasting space as a whole, if you're still thinking about the sort of industry, and you're still thinking about, how can I tweak Pod Hunt so it works more in line with kind of where the industry is headed. If you're still thinking about those things, not necessarily thinking directly about Pod Hunt, but if you're still thinking about, in that case,
the problem
about podcasting and the problem that you're trying to solve, then the chances are that you still have that energy, even though you do feel tired and you're not working on it all the time anymore. But the chances are that, after a week or two, you'll come back to it and you'll still have that energy, or you will have refound that kind of energy as well.
Last question on that is around selling. So that's another option you have with these side projects. So I know you've sold a few different projects in the past, including the robotics AI website you talked about and a bunch of others. So I'm curious, how do you how's that even come about? Is it people just proactively reaching out to you, or do you have a marketplace that you go to, like Flipper, or use a broker or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on the kind of which kind of project it is in terms of if it's even even if I was trying to make money with it or not. Some of my projects I just have no plans to make money from them, but they get traction in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, it's been a mixture of stuff in the past. Some people just reached out to me and said, "Hey, I saw you launch that thing. I saw you're not really focused on it anymore. Would you be interested in selling it?" It's a project that they're excited about, so that's kind of awesome as well. And then in other cases, like with the Will Robots site, we just, like I said, we just got to the point where we didn't know what to do with it, so we're like, let's try and sell it. And I think at the time there really wasn't too many other options to kind of just publicly list, and so I think we listed that one on Flipper for a while. Now there's a few more options. Micro acquire is a really awesome if you have a project that you want to sell. But yeah, so I mean, I think, like I said, it depends on what kind of product. If it's a SaaS business and you've got a few customers and things like that, then finding a buyer for those is obviously much easier. If it's a project that's not really trying to make money, it's much harder to sell those, because why would somebody buy it if it's not making any money? Obviously, in some cases there's a fit in terms of it might fit into somebody's plans in terms of what kind of where they wanted to expand and stuff like that. It's much harder to find a kind of buyer in those cases, but often in those cases the buyer will kind of find you instead.
This is quite a hot space right now. Like, buying and selling websites has been around for some time. Buying and selling businesses has been around for decades or maybe even longer. And we actually did a deep dive in this with a guy called Ryan Culp a few episodes ago. And so if someone's listening to this, you're interested in that world, you can go and listen to that as well. But to summarize on valuations, usually there's a multiple of revenue valuation that you use, and there's a range. But a lot of the times your side projects might not have any revenue. So how would you normally value something like that?
Yeah, like I said, that's the hardest bit, right? Like, I mean, in terms of, like, I think, you both sides have to be somewhat reasonable in terms of what their expectations are. You're not gonna, if you've got a project that's not making a lot of money, that's not growing a lot, nobody's gonna pay you a massive multiple on your ARR. People are gonna pay you, maybe 2-3 times your ARR, maybe. And so I think there you just have to be reasonable. Like, nobody's going to say you're the next Facebook if you've got 1,000 people on your website, right? So I think everybody just needs to be reasonable there. I think if it's something that's not purely based on the revenue side of the sale, because those ones are pretty straightforward, right? Like, you kind of have a number in mind, or you have a number that that you're making, and whether that's expanding or contracting kind of every month. And then, there basically are industry standards. It seems to be somewhere between, 2 and 3 times ARR, and you just kind of have to sit down and do the sort of math and see what makes sense. If it's something that's not, focused on the revenue side, you're still pre-revenue, you're still focused on, expanding your user base, or if it's a blog and you're just writing lots of content and you haven't really put any ads in there and stuff like that, it just comes back to, like, if somebody wanted to build a site like that and they wanted to grow a community like that, how long would it take them, right? Like, what's the time and effort required to recreate what you have, and how much time is that worth? And then so you just kind of have to sit down and do the math. Like, if somebody wants to buy this and I say, it's going to cost $60,000 or $50,000, does that make sense for the person doing the sort of acquiring? Like, is it cheaper for them just to go hire somebody to write a bunch of blog posts and put out their own blog, right? So you just kind of have to kind of figure out, get into the heads of the other people and say, okay, can they do it? Is it going to be about the same? Then maybe it's worthwhile, because because they're not taking the risk, right? Like, they're not saying, if I find somebody to write this and they write all these blog posts, are we going to rank? Are we going to get the sort of traffic that we're expecting, versus just buying something that has that ranking in the search engines, has that amount of traffic already, versus trying to experiment with and try and figure out a formula that kind of works as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, man. I think a lot of people just look at a template of, like, this is how it works in this world and we have to sell it for X multiple. Whereas like sometimes you have to be a bit creative and think about like, well, what is the value that I'm providing? Is it the fact that they don't have to hire a developer to build this for 6 months and I've already done that for them? Plus I'm a really good developer and I cost a lot of money, so they probably got a pretty good bargain here if they were already going to do it. Another thing that has value but might not have monetary value yet is just an audience. Like if you've got 4 million people on your site and there's, let's say, SEO juice or anything like that that's valuable, that doesn't have a tangible amount on it for you yet, but it might do for someone who works in a similar space. Let's move on to the next section, which is all about ideas, right? People listening to this, I'm sure, are the sort of people that love ideas and love having ideas. But I've heard you say you're someone who gets ideas all the time. You're looking for problems all the time. You're speaking to people and hearing their problems. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe we could even just pull up your idea list, if that's cool, if you're happy to share. I think you said you've got like a Trello board or something like that.
I used to have a Moleskine that had all of my ideas in it, and I moved into the digital age instead, and now I moved into...
Wait, what year was this when you transitioned to the digital world?
Oh, I think this was back in like 2016, I think.
Oh,
I was
wow.
like,
okay, so you had it handwritten until then.
Yeah, I had it handwritten for a really long time. Because I liked having it just kind of with me all the time. Like I would always just have like a pad handy, and then so anytime I got an idea, I would just kind of write it in.
So you use Trello, you said, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's very standard, just kind of like a card interface. There's lots of tools that kind of have this. I used Trello from a really long time when they first launched, and I've just kind of stuck with it. But yeah, ideas are everywhere. I think you just have to be receptive to kind of seeing the opportunities out there. And so, just keep, I tend to just keep an eye on the things that I'm doing every day and, what becomes annoying after a while. And then, just kind of looking at your inbox too. Like, I tell people this all the time, and not just me, I've kind of heard other people say this too. If there's a spreadsheet that you email around to a bunch of people with, can you update this information within this spreadsheet, and you pass it back and forth, there's a good chance that you could turn that into an application that people could just access instead, and kind of make it into like a functioning application instead of just a spreadsheet that you try and keep up to date. Kind of stuff like that. One of my first side projects ever. It actually wasn't the first one. It's probably my second or third one, but so this is going back to like 2002, 2003, I guess, was kind of one of these early ideas. Was I realized after a while that I would wake up, kind of in the morning, and I'm a web developer. I'm making websites all the time, and there was probably like 10 or 20 web design galleries out there that you could visit just to see what people were launching, what awesome work, what the pages look like, and kind of what people were doing with this new CSS thing that was out there. And so I just saw that every morning I would wake up and I would go to the same 5 sites every day, right? Like I would go to CSS Mania and a few other ones as well. And so after about a week of this, I was like, why am I keep going to these same 5 sites every morning? So I built a website that, all these sites had RSS feeds. And so I built a very simple tool that would every few hours would just go and collect the RSS feed of all the sites that I would normally visit manually, collect them all and put them in one page. And so that was one of my first side projects, was just this idea that why am I manually repetitively doing these things every day when I can have access to technology? It can do this thing for me. So that was one of my first side projects. It was just collecting these RSS feeds, aggregating them in kind of one place. And back in the day, that made it onto like the homepage of Dig back then. I think that crashed the server because I had like 40,000 people come in the space of about 2 hours, and my server was not ready for that back then.
Yeah. Then that feeling of like, all these people coming to my site, but now my server's down is like a crazy high and low that I've had as well. And it's just Man, that's fun. And Dig back in the day was, for any of our younger listeners, Dig was like the equivalent of, I don't know, I mean, there's not really an equivalent anymore, because it was where you would go to see. Did they call it the front page of the internet, or was that someone else?
I think so. Yeah, I think so for a while.
Love that. So yeah, let's go into, if it's cool, obviously if you've got some of those ideas you're working on or you want to keep, that's cool too. But if there are some that you've seen problems and you said, oh, I'd love if someone would build this, I don't have time, maybe we could share a few of those, and then we can dig into how you would potentially validate an idea.
I mean, one of the ones I've talked about on kind of other podcasts as well, like I've been, again, this is just kind of seeing things that I do and seeing how other people are actually talking about what they're doing, and then seeing a way to kind of apply technology onto that as well. So I like I mentioned earlier, I'm a big user of Twitter, and I follow a bunch of people, and I'm pretty active on it, but I've been changing how I used Twitter recently as well. So instead of just following hundreds of people, following thousands of people, I've been creating these lists of people in specific kind of expertise or specific industries and things like that. So for example, I have an indie hackers list, which has probably about 400 people in it, that that I kind of look at that list every once in a while, just to kind of see what people are talking about in the indie hacker space. I use the Laravel, Alpine.js, Tailwind, Livewire stack, the tall stack it's called. So I have I think I have about 50 people in that list where where they're just all kind of talking about how to make software with all those different parts of the stack as well. And so one of my ideas is, well, again, it's hard to keep up to date with everything that's happening in those lists. So it would be really cool if somebody just built a tool where I could link my account. I could pick the lists that I want to kind of receive a summary for, and then every morning or every evening or whatever, if I could get an email that said, look, here's the top tweets from this particular list. That way, it gives me a very easy way to keep up with what's happening in a specific industry, in a specific group, in a specific community of people, without necessarily having to read every tweet.
I love that idea. I would use that. So if someone's listening and wants to build this, then email or DM us, and I'd love to help in any way I can. But just let's say you've got this idea, and now you're trying to figure out, like, how do I validate if this is just a problem for myself or a lot of other people have this? And this was actually a question from Mohammed Rafi from Dubai on Twitter as well. He asked, how do you validate an idea and double down on what's working?
Yeah, I mean, in this particular case, with this particular idea, like I've seen, not just me, like I said, I'm pretty active on Twitter, so I know what other people are talking about Twitter. I mean, there's other people out there who I know are doing the same thing that I am, in terms of, instead of following thousands of people, they're creating these lists, and they're following people, or they're following activity based on those lists. So I think the first way to validate this idea is just try and get some try and reach out to people who you could search Twitter for people who are using these kind of lists, right? You could run some searches for people who talk about the fact that they're creating a list for this or that or the other, and just reach out to them and say, hey, I noticed that people are very open on Twitter to kind of talking and giving feedback and stuff. So just send them a tweet where if they have their DMs open, fantastic. If not, just send them a tweet, just at them and say, I saw you, or I saw that you mentioned that you're kind of working in this way. How are you finding it? Keeping up with all the tweets, like, would it be helpful if there was a tool that did this, right? Like, I mean, so I think it's very easy in this day and age to talk to people about problems that they're having and potential ways that you might kind of ease those problems as well. That's probably the easiest way to validate this particular idea, just to see how many people are actually experiencing this, and also in many ways, I think this is actually a good way to curate content as well. So I always like to think about, like, okay, this is a very specific problem that I'm trying to solve in terms of my my kind of niche, or my problem is I'm trying to keep up with all these tweets. But let's say you're trying to curate content in a particular space in terms of AI or marketing or sales or whatever. Wouldn't it be awesome if you could just build up a list of these things, of people, of experts in those kind of sort of in those industries and things, and now you can get like an aggregation, a summary of what's really cool and what people are liking, what people are retweeting in those specific industries as well. So you think about the specific idea that you want to use this for, but also what's the ways that other people might use this thing as well.
Love that, man. I'm just going to pull up my list really quickly, if that's cool. Yeah. And we'll just do one more example. I didn't want you to be the only one volunteering information. I will put, so yeah, like a lot of people, you have a list, mostly bad ideas, but
but you never know.
Yeah, and a lot of the time the ideas are they might already exist in some form as well, because these are just literally raw ideas I have, and I'll write them down. So here's one which I think probably does exist, but I thought a lot about when I was looking at real estate. So basically a scrape tool for real estate, which will basically take Zillow data, which would have like average buying price of real estate, and then compare that to the average rental value, and then also compare that to Airbnb yield, essentially. So this is before the current situation we're in. So if you were taking an idea like that, I don't know if that's something you find interesting or not, but how would you try to figure out if this is something people would use?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think with ideas like that, there's two things that you have to keep in mind. Like, one, is this even possible, right? Like, can you even build that? And that's the first thing. Like, can you really scrape that information in a way that's effective and efficient? Because you kind of need to keep it like, and accurate, like, and within like a few weeks or months, right? Because obviously house prices change, rental prices change, Airbnb availability. Because one thing, somebody might list the Airbnb as, at a specific price, but are they actually renting out the sort of houses at that particular price for like an extended period of time? So understanding, just because you can buy something for a price and sell it doesn't mean that you're actually making that kind of money as well. So one is like, technically, is it even possible? Like, so that's the first kind of evaluation step that I would take. And then, and secondly, I mean, that's a bit harder. You kind of have to know what the real estate market looks like in terms of who might be interested in that kind of information as well. So, maybe there's a subreddit for people who are Airbnb owners. And so maybe you could reach out, maybe you could post something in there to say, would you be interested in this kind of tool that would kind of help you expand your Airbnb empire? Something like that as well. So I think, it's just a matter of trying to figure out who is somebody who might be interested in that. And then see, or, just even if you're not like having a product to sell, but ask them how they do it now. Like if there's somebody in that Airbnb ownership subreddit or whatever, say, how did you decide where to buy your apartment or your house or whatever that you plan to kind of Airbnb out? Like, what was the process that you went through to kind of evaluate whether that was a smart choice or not, just to understand how people are doing it now and how can you optimize what they're doing now. It may not be the exact same idea that you had, but you're still trying to solve the same problem. And if you find that, technically you can't implement the solution that you had in mind, maybe there's a way that you can improve the process that they're currently using that will help them out, that will save them money or save them time or whatever it is. And if that works, that may be, make those incremental steps instead of solve that one little issue that they have, and then kind of build out the sort of larger options afterwards as well.
Love that. Yeah, for sure, man. And actually, I was using that. That's an old idea I've had. And since then, I did actually do research. There's a company called AirDNA that does do something pretty similar to this, but specifically for Airbnb. So my reason for looking at it was because I said, okay, I want to invest in real estate. And my family has done that for most of my life. So I was interested in it. But my thought was, well, they just bought places that were near where they lived, and that was great, and it made sense because they can go and like rent it out to people and be there face to face. That's a really helpful way to think through how you would validate that. So thanks for sharing that. Another thing that's come up in recent years is the NoCode movement, and so you're an actual real coder. You know how to write custom code and you build things from scratch. But that's obviously quite a small percentage of the population. Now there are tools out there like, there's so many. Are there any that Bubble, I think, is one huge one.
Webflow is another one.
Exactly. Are you using any of these tools to quickly deploy something versus spending a whole week on it? Maybe you can do it in one night using some of these tools.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, yeah. I mean, like if I'm going to working on a project and I know it's going to take me, you know, a few weeks or a month or a few months or whatever to kind of get from idea to kind of a site live. Yeah, I mean, I'll use just like a, you know, standard landing page builder or a Webflow or something like that, just to whip up a quick little landing page that people can go sign up for while I'm still working on stuff. And if I don't have to spend, you know, six hours like figuring out what I want it to look like and how should I build this, and if I can do it in, you know, like a few minutes, then absolutely, yeah. I think it's, you know, you do have to figure out like what's the best way to use my time. And this is just a temporary thing, right? Like you just want to get something up there so people can sign up and be, you know, add it to an email list or whatever, so that when you're ready to launch, that you have like, you know, that you have potential people who want to purchase your thing. So, but you don't want to spend weeks on just building the landing page, or even hours just building the landing page. If you can get that done in a few minutes, which with a lot of these tools you can point and click and you can have a site up and running in a matter of minutes. You should absolutely take advantage of that.
So what are the limitations? Because like there are people, obviously MakerPad is the big player in this space who are teaching lots of people. People should check them out if you haven't already, if you're interested in this. But you know, like they're showing examples of basically cloning Airbnb, cloning like different marketplaces. As someone who's not technical, what is the limitation of just sticking with that for a longer period of time?
There's not too many. I mean, it's just mostly at that point, it ends up being around the experience that the user has, right? Like you really are just kind of hacking stuff together to get things to talk to each other and kind of look the way that you want it to, right? Like if you want a real cohesive experience that a user will go through, then, you know, having something custom makes a lot more sense. Now, if you're just validating an idea, I don't think people are expecting to have a, you know, totally cohesive end-to-end experience in terms of using your application kind of at that point as well. So I think it's absolutely fine to kind of start with that and say, again, it goes back to like, is this something that people actually need solved? Is this a problem that people are actually experiencing? Is you know, even if it's a bit painful to use it, if it's a bit painful to use it and people are still using it, that's a good sign that you're building something that people actually want. And if you can over time, you know, have people paying you, you can then afford to either hire somebody or to find somebody to kind of make like a full version for you. But it's a way to make sure that you're actually building something that people actually want.
All right, so just to switch gears a little bit, we talked a little bit about Founderpath earlier. So this is a project it seems like most of your time is spent on this nowadays. And just to summarize again, Founderpath, you can raise up to $1 million in up to $1 million in 72 hours in debt funding is what it says on the landing page anyway. And from my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is a lot of people, especially in the SaaS space, which is, it looks like your primary audience, will say, okay, I've got a product that's working and now I need to scale it. I need money for customer acquisition or hiring a developer or whatever it is. And they normally would go to get investment from a VC firm or whoever, and they would then have to give equity away. And that equity could be worth a lot of money in the long run if it continues to grow. So Nathan Latka, who interviews thousands of people in this space, saw this issue keep coming up. And he said, well, why don't we just help provide that to people in a really quick way? And then he came to you to make it happen. Is that right?
Yeah, no, I mean, so yeah, I met Nathan, I think it's been about 18 months ago, maybe a little bit longer than that now. And yeah, so initially we weren't working on this idea specifically, but we were like, again, it was one of these, let's do a quick little project at the beginning just to see if we like working together and yeah, kind of see if we're a good fit in terms of partnering up on stuff in the future as well. So yeah, again, so we just built a quick little side project that we built in like 2 weeks, and we kind of put it out there, and then we just kind of continued to kind of collaborate on stuff. And kind of as you said, he was talking to founders kind of all the time. He was seeing what kind of problems that they were having, and then he just kind of we just kept talking and saying, what if we did this for founders? What if we tried doing this for founders? And obviously, how can we make this sort of idea work? Like, obviously we're taking a risk, right? Like we're lending people money, and how do we reduce that risk? Like, what can we analyze about the way that company is operating, about the customers that they have, their churn rate, their retention rate, their LTVs, all of the customer distribution risk that there might be. What's the ways that we can help to use technology to kind of optimize the sort of whole process, so that the founders are comfortable taking money from us, and we're comfortable that the founders will actually pay back that capital as well. So, and then ultimately the sort of main reason for us doing it is, we didn't want founders to like have to give up a board on their seat and to give up some percentage of their company, just for really what they were looking for was like a short-term infusion of capital, so that just kind of like you said, they could hire somebody, or they could spend some money to accelerate their growth in the short term. And then they just end up taking a long-term hit on kind of having to surrender some part of that equity, and then in sort of in the worst case, you end up losing control of your own company as well.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that, and I love the whole story of. I mean, Nathan's a funny guy. I like him a lot, but he's just like like I'm just kind of imagining him pitching you, like just being like, "Hey, Mubs, this is what I got." Like using the hands, got the gestures down, and so I'm curious, like when it got to that point of saying, "Okay, here we've done a side project together, but I want to do this bigger thing with you, Mubs." I'm sure it was probably him pitching you in a way to say like, can you like work on this close to full time with me on this, like, and whatever you're happy to share, obviously, but like how does he convince someone like you to make that your main thing when you've got so many projects you've focused on in the past? Like what about like even just pay and equity? Is that something you guys say, like, is it just a straight pay thing, or do you get equity? How do you guys figure out the split there?
Yeah, no, so it's funny because I think after about 8 months of us working, just on the kind of weekends and evenings and things on fun kind of side projects, I was like, it's been awesome working with you, Nathan, but I just don't think I have the time to kind of carry on because, I've got lots of other things going on. And it was funny because, he just responded almost immediately and was like, No, Mubs. It's been awesome working with you. Let's figure out a way that we kind of make this happen. So obviously it's like a nice ego boost that somebody like him wants to come back to you and say, it's been great working with you, and let's kind of work it out in terms of how we can make this happen and make this kind of a long-term thing as well. And so we kind of talked all about the sort of different options in terms of just kind of straight salary, coming on as a co-founder and having equity and stuff, and we could, because it's like he's not taking any salary right now, and I am, because I need to pay the bills and kind of things like that. So we just had like those frank conversations about, if you want this kind of salary, then we can talk about you having this amount of equity. If you want to take that salary, we can have this kind of amount of equity and all that kind of stuff too. So that's the best thing that you can do, I think, kind of in those situations, is just be honest with people in terms of, don't put yourself in a hole in terms of, I'm going to take a massive pay cut so I can take more of, so I can take more equity, or sort of things like that. And just be honest and have the frank conversations, but then also understand that it's okay not to own 50% of a company, because you're also making a salary. So yeah, and I think you just have to accept the fact that it's not going to be an equal split if people are taking salary and some people aren't taking salary, and sort of also, and just try and work it out so everybody's happy at the end of it, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely, man. No, that makes a lot of sense. And another thing I'd add there is that pay is not always financial. So if you're young in your career and you're starting out, like often people go and take a job somewhere and get paid less than they could somewhere else, but they're going to learn a lot more. They're going to get exposure to people, or they're going to get a lot more satisfaction from that job. Like I've done that in my career where I was like at a stage where I cared more about the purpose of the role and, you know, in that case, leading a team and doing these other things that I wanted more experience in. And that was an intangible that wasn't just money, right? So I think it's important lesson to take.
Oh yeah, and you know, I made that choice maybe 15 years ago too, right? Like there's plenty of people when they speak to me, they're like, Mubs, how are you not in San Francisco? How are you not in New York City? How are you not in all of these like tech hubs? Like you're like the prototypical startup guy. How are you not in San Francisco? I was like, well, because I wanted to raise a family and I wanted my family to have a good, high quality, life in terms of having a backyard where they can run around. My kids can run around, and yeah, I mean, I could have made the choice that I was going to go live in San Francisco. I'm going to live in like a 3-bedroom apartment and everybody's going to be packed on top of each other. And I just made that choice. Like, that's not what I want for myself and my family. And I think you kind of have to make those trade-offs in terms of, yeah, I could be living in San Francisco working for, a high velocity startup, and I wouldn't be at home. I wouldn't be participating in what's happening in my kids' lives because I'd be at work all the time. And then yes, I think at some point everybody has to make that assessment for themselves. What's important for you right now, and what's going to be important for you in the future. And like you said, I mean, when I was young, I was quite happy working 18-hour days because I was single, I was alone in this country, and it made all the sense in the world to spend as much time as I could in the office. Now that I'm much older and I've got kids, it makes much more sense for me to work out of my house and spend as much time as I can with my family instead.
I love that, man. Yeah, and I think you were definitely ahead of the curve because that's where things have moved anyway this year, especially for a lot of people where we've kind of fast forwarded a little bit, and a lot of people will go back to working in an office whenever we're able to. But for a lot of people, they've said, well, actually now I've just realized it's more important for me to be closer to my family, raise my kids, or whatever it is. And the other good thing is a lot of companies are also saying that, like,
yeah,
they don't require everyone to come to the office anymore. A lot of the big tech firms are already doing that. So I think it's all moving in a more flexible direction, which is good.
I think that, I mean, as bad as this year has been, I think the sort of silver lining that we can kind of put onto this whole thing is that there was a lot of people who were hesitant to kind of do the whole remote thing, and then now they've been kind of forced into trying it. And just kind of like you said, they've realized, well, this isn't so bad, it's sort of at the end of the day. And not just from the worker standpoint, but from the sort of, from management side of things. I think there was a lot more apprehension to kind of have people not be in an office where they couldn't be kind of observed and things like that. And people have realized that, you can trust your employees. If you tell them that, look, here's the list of things you need to get done, you don't need to have them in an office sat down working. They will do the things that they said that they would do. And in the vast majority of cases, it's going to be, I think it is going to be an interesting shift to kind of see how people, especially in big cities where it's very, very expensive to have offices and things like that, how many companies now are just going to abandon that and say, we're going fully remote now.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting to see for sure, man. This is a question from @TrailWest on Twitter as well. He asked, how do you avoid procrastination and execute on your ideas faster? You probably saw that. But, like you clearly are a pretty effective worker. You're efficient and effective. And that's something I'm sure most people really struggle with. So, and maybe it's something you struggle with too, I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm curious, like, how do you make sure you aren't procrastinating and getting things done that you need to get done?
Yeah, it's a really hard one, and it comes with just a lot of experience and a lot of trying stuff over the years. I think with a lot of people there is a certain amount of fear about it's not so much procrastination in that they don't know what they need to do and they don't know how to do it. It's the fear of, I'm going to launch this thing and it's going to be a complete flop. And I think the biggest kind of mindset shift that I had when I finally started to kind of ship a lot of stuff was I didn't really see it as a success or failure in terms of the actual like result of it. I mean, I started to think about the fact that I shipped something was the success, right? Like whether it got 1 user or 100 users or 1,000 users, that wasn't my parameter for success anymore. And I think once you stop thinking about this is that it was good that I did this because I got 1,000 people to come to the website or 100,000 people come to the website. When you start thinking about, oh, I learned this along the way and I was able to launch this and I was able to put this out there for people to see, you kind of remove a lot of those obstacles about, why am I waiting? I'm waiting for something to be perfect. I'm waiting for the color of this website. It's not quite the right red because people might come to it and they might not like the shade of red that I chose, and I think, people put too much pressure and kind of expectation on themselves that I'm going to launch this thing and lots of people are going to come and they're going to love it and it's going to be fantastic, and hopefully they will. But the fact that you were able to, take an idea, turn it into something and launch it, that should be the bar that we're trying to set, right? And then what comes afterwards. But also just start thinking about it not as a launch is the end of the process either, right? Because launching is about putting stuff into the hands of users so they can tell you what they actually think. And I think that to me has been why I've been able to ship stuff, because I'm thinking about, and I say launch a lot, but it's not really launching, right? Like it's putting stuff out there for people to tell you what they think, and then you can start to think about scaling and continuing to kind of expand after that.
You basically just summarized some of the questions I had for you after, which were going to lead into the fear part. So no, I completely agree with you, man, because I think when people are procrastinating, there's this it's this balance of like perfection and like good enough, and I don't really love that phrase good enough, because it makes you think it's not of high quality, but there's a difference between perfection and getting it done, I guess, is another way of putting it. So that's great, man. The last point on that, and I think it kind of touches on the same topic, which is kind of like understanding your why. I've heard you talk about this as well, and I think you referenced Simon Sinek's famous book and famous TED Talk, Start With Why. So I'm curious, like you've seemed like quite an introspective person, and you've got thousands of reps in doing this sort of work over many years, and you've probably had a lot of time to kind of ponder that question for yourself. So is that something you figured out for yourself?
No, I mean, I think you start every project with that. I think that's the main question that you kind of have to answer, or it's the question that you have to ask, and then obviously what the answer is kind of will change a lot of what you do. But each of the projects that I start with, that's my first question. Is like, why am I making this? Like, is it just a fun project to learn something new? Is it a fun project because I love football, so I'm going to make a project for football. I love going to the movies, so I'm going to make a project about movies. Or, it's time to get a new job, and do I want to build something that's going to either help me connect with people who are going to be the kind of people that I want to work with, or is this going to be a SaaS business that people are going to pay me and it's going to become my thing, right? Like just understanding that has huge implications on what you build and how you build it and why you build it and how you talk about it as well, because I think that's hugely important as well. Kind of how you talk about your projects with other people has a huge impact on how they react to it as well. Like there's plenty of SaaS businesses out there that if people had approached them in the right way, like this is a SaaS business, this is a serious business, when you start talking to people, they're going to treat it seriously too. So understanding why you're doing something and what your expectations are kind of at the end of it as well, I think has a huge impact on whether you succeed or not.
I think that's a great way to finish up, man. I know we've got to go in a couple of minutes. Thanks a lot for sharing all this, man. It's really impressive what you're doing, and I just love like your energy, man. I think what you embody is this like wisdom in a way of you figured a lot of things out that a lot of people haven't, which is focus on the process, not just the end goal. You're doing things that you love doing. You're adding value to the world. You're partnering with people. You're helping other people learn. So I commend you for all of that, man, and appreciate you sharing it today.
No, thanks. I appreciate that. I mean, and yeah, and I think the main thing I guess I will end with is it's a journey. Nobody arrives here already understanding all of this stuff, right? Like it's taken me a good long time to kind of work all of this stuff out. So it's okay if you haven't figured this, if you're young and you haven't figured this stuff out, it's okay. Like it might take you a bit of time, but you will work it out. And as long as you do, having those conversations both with yourself and with other people is the hard bit, I think, right? Like having those honest and frank conversations with people that you might be working with on an idea and stuff. It's kind of hard to have those conversations, but the more that you have those conversations, the happier you'll be. And it may not be the perfect outcome for that one particular situation that you're in, but it'll make it easier for the next one and the next one and the next one after that as well.
Yeah, thanks, man. And we can send people to your Twitter, right? At Mubashar Iqbal. We'll put that on the screen. And I said it like your parents might say it. So Mubs, but Mubashar Iqbal. So thanks a lot, man. I'd love to do this again, and we should definitely stay in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure I'll be back down at
some point. All right, brother. Well, we'll speak again soon.
All right, thank you.
Cheers.